Miriam Martin LaValle to talk about the consortium specifically, and then I will dive into more details discussing the evaluation, what you need to know, how to submit a proposal for us. So in terms of logistics, we're going to try and aim for about an hour, leaving plenty of space for Q&A is the goal here to be able to answer and clarify any questions that you may have about the proposal and about what we're looking for. We mute you, so there will be no kind of talking from the attendees. But when it comes time for Q&A or throughout the presentation, you can start soliciting your questions. Please use specifically the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screens to submit your questions. And then Nikki will facilitate those questions in the Q&A period at the end. You are able to upvote questions. So rather than repeating someone's questions, kind of just gauge what people have asked already and then upvote that. And that tells us that's a priority for us to answer. And we'll try and answer it as it arises to the top of the list. We are recording the webinar. It will show up in two places, both the events page for the webinar as well as on the open opportunities page of the FAR website. And feel free to engage with your colleagues in the chat function and connect with other folks and organizations as you seem necessary. Quickly, again, we're going to go into a little bit of detail about FAR for those of you unfamiliar with the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. And then that also will tailor into about ICASA, which is a consortium that is a kind of part of FAR, and Miriam will discuss that. And then I'll talk specifically about the scope of the proposal, give you some illustrative examples of outputs that we've really liked to date of other proposal or other evaluations. We'll discuss the proposal submission, and then I'll provide some extra resources as well as leaving plenty of time for the Q&A again. So Jasmine?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. So my name is Dr. Jasmine Bruno, and I'm a scientific program director here at FAR on the Thriving Production Systems team. And I'm briefly going to share a little bit about FAR, or the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. We were established in the 2014 Farm Bill with this eye towards connecting funders, researchers, and farmers to really pioneer ag innovation. And how we do that is through designing and supporting these collaborations in agriculture that fund and design and implement the science that we know is needed to advance the innovations that are needed in agriculture. Next slide, Nikki. So a little bit about the FAR factor, or what is our unique role in this space. We aim to be complementary to USDA's research agenda. An example of that in our portfolio, for instance, is in the emerging pest and pathogen space. USDA is being responsive in terms of the longer research agenda, and we have a programming where we aim to rapidly deploy funds, and that program is called ROAR. So being able to work in step with USDA. We also, of course, look to fill critical knowledge gaps in the research that we fund. And something that is unique about FAR, for every dollar of the federal funding that we spend, we match that with one non-federal dollar, really with this eye towards increasing public ag research investment in this space. Then we focus on actionable science. So we do support basic and fundamental work, but it really needs to have a line of sight towards driving change in the field, in the farm. And again, to do that, we build these collaborative partnerships where we are working with researchers and producers to understand what those challenges are in this space. Next slide, Nikki. So we're really excited that at FAR last year, we celebrated our 10-year anniversary. So this shows a bit about FAR at a glance in terms of some of the accomplishments that we're excited to share. That has looked like over 400 grants have been awarded in FAR's lifetime. For every dollar of federal funding that we have spent, we have unlocked that with at least $1.40 in terms of match. So again, amplifying that federal investment. We're really excited to share that we have over 550 unique partners. Again, that collaborative design in terms of funding research, designing research, and implementing it is part of really that FAR factor. So excited that we work with so many partners in this space. And then we have awarded over $775 million worth of research funding. Next slide, Nikki. So briefly, a little bit about how we do that. We have 4 key funding mechanisms at FAR. I'll actually first direct you to the lower right-hand corner in terms of consortia, partially because that is why we're here today to talk about ICASA, which was one of our flagship consortia at FAR. And again, speaking to collaboration, these are collaborative entities that identify and fund and support research. And typically we're looking at research needs that are much more long-standing in the space, that we understand that we really want to be able to bring diverse stakeholders together to tackle. And so the consortia are really signature to FAR's model. And then next, in terms of direct awards and competitive grants, so we issue competitive calls for funding, and we use those to identify what is the research in the space and what is the cutting edge work that we want to support. And then direct awards, we often implement when we identify a critical challenge with collaborators, and we know that there's really a key team that can address that. It's important to note that we deploy competitive and direct mechanisms both within consortia and external to consortia. So that's relevant here because in ICASA, we have done both competitive calls as well as direct awards. And then finally, our 4th mechanism is the prize mechanism. An example of that in our portfolio, for instance, is our EgTech prize, which is looking to advance technology to support in ovosexing in the US market. So that's a little bit about the mechanisms that we use to fund. And again, consortia are what we'll predominantly focus on today. Next slide, Nikki. All right, so again, we've celebrated 10 years of FAR, and in doing that, we had a fabulous opportunity to go and talk to stakeholders in the sector and really ID where FAR needs to go for the next 5 years. And that is reflected in our strategy refresh that we launched last year. And we identified 4 key priority areas. Cultivating thriving production systems, that's where this team sits and where ICASA is nested in our portfolio. We also have the bolstering healthy food systems team, so looking a little bit more at kind of the consumer end. Sustaining vibrant agro ecosystems, our team focused really on kind of soil, water, and environmental outcomes. And then finally, strengthening the scientific workforce. So within the Cultivating Thriving Production Systems team, we have our animal systems portfolio, which is where ICASA sits. We have 3 key pillars that we're driving towards, which are enhancing economic viability in the systems, improving agricultural stewardship, and then improving animal health, welfare, and productivity. ICASA has really been the flagship consortium in that pillar of improving animal health, welfare, and productivity. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Miriam Martin-Lavalley, to share a little bit about the work that ICASA has done to date. So Miriam, off to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bruno. Like she mentioned, I'm Dr. Miriam Martin-Lavalley, and I am the Scientific Project Manager on the Animal Systems team. I'm going to share just a little bit about the ICASA Consortium, and if you have any additional questions that we don't cover that you feel like would be helpful as you write your proposal, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A, and we will be happy to answer those at the end of the webinar. So firstly, kind of taking a broad view of ICASA, we'll talk a little bit about ICASA's vision. So producing healthier livestock and investing in research that creates practical solutions, such as new technologies and management practices that promote judicious use of antibiotics, produce healthier livestock, and improve animal welfare is ICASA's vision. So Nikki, you can go to the next slide. And there are some consortium aims that, as the consortium kicked off in 2019, were established. And so I'll briefly share those with you. Investigating and developing cross-disciplinary management practices is one of the consortium aims, as well as supporting the investigation and development of new diagnostic tools and technologies, supporting improvements in understanding the biological function of antibiotic alternatives, and then finally, promoting and encouraging the advancement of agricultural science that benefits the public good by timely release of knowledge and materials that are created from public-private partnerships. So you can go to the next slide, Nikki. And these are some details about the consortium. So the consortium was created in 2019, and the first iteration of the consortium, which we refer to as ICASA 1.0, came to a close this year in 2025. And that iteration of the consortium was comprised of 19 participating organizations. So you can see all of those organizations down at the bottom of the slide. ICASA covers both the beef and the pork sector, so you'll see representatives from both of those sectors and then across the supply chain. So genetics companies, animal health companies, feed yards, as well as packers, to name a few of the participants. And the program investment was approximately 15 million, and to date, there have been 29 research projects that have been funded through ICASA. So to give you a little bit of context about where we're at, the first iteration of the consortium has come to a close in 2025, and we are in the process of kicking off the second iteration of the consortium that we're really excited about. So our hope is that we can take all of the learnings from this evaluation and incorporate them into the next iteration of the consortium. So a little bit of information about the participating organizations and their level of involvement. They get to determine the scientific scope of the consortium and really the strategic direction. They're heavily involved in project review and approve which projects they would like to fund and move forward with in the consortium. And then finally, they're also involved in new participant recruitment. And the structure and governance model of how ICASA has functioned up to this point has been through 6 working groups. And so some of those have been beef and swine specific, and then some of those have been cross-cutting. And so in the first iteration, the working groups were cross-cutting technologies, late-day morbidity in beef cattle, metaphylaxis, liver abscesses in beef cattle, swine health, and beef stewardship. So that's a little bit of detail about the consortium. I am going to stop there and hand it over to Chris, but if you have any additional questions about the consortium that would be helpful to you, please go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box and we'll answer those at the end of the webinar. So Chris, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you all. So we're going to dive into the scope quickly, and then we'll keep moving forward and hopefully leave some room for the Q&A portion, which we're really excited about to clarify things. Might be a delay on my end, Nikki. So first and foremost, I want to make sure we're all here for the same reason. We are asking for proposals to evaluate ICASA, which you just learned a little bit about the program. This is not funding through the consortium to do research within ICASA. And so the types of evaluation that we are looking for in the proposal are twofold, and you kind of heard parts of that with what Dr. Martin LaValle said in regards to recommendations coming back for 2.0. That's in connection to assessing the process and implementation of ICASA. And so what that looks like is evaluating essentially the efficiencies of project lifecycle, both from the stage that the working groups solicited or directly funded research projects to the closeout of those projects. And what that hopefully will get in return from that assessment is strengths and weaknesses of several areas, and we'll kind of define that a little bit more as we talk about the evaluation questions specifically. Secondly, what's as important is an assessment of the outcomes and impacts of the research funded to date. And really helping us understand and evaluate those tangible results from research funding. This is going to help us as an organization really determine whether the investments delivered knowledge products and innovations, and kind of what trajectory those innovations have had. Have they led to any uptake or adoption in the industry, and the impacts on the industry? And as you could see in the conversation before about ICASA, mainly in regard to both beef and swine industries is where the research has focused to date. And that's got to connect again to productivity, animal health, antimicrobial stewardship, really helping us understand what those outcomes and impacts are. So 2 assessments are part of this singular evaluation. Now, what is the role we seek from you? There's several things that we're hoping the evaluator will bring to the table. One of those is to be able to partner with us to help define success. So we have some understandings of what we're looking for, but we really want to work with the collaborator to develop these measures to help answer the evaluation questions. Additionally, what we need as an organization is for you to help extend our capacity in identifying some of the stakeholders that would be kind of next level users, end users of the innovations and knowledge products from the research that were funded, as well as go and collect data, both through whatever data collection instruments you want to propose, key informant interviews, surveys, other methodologies, but to really extend our ability to communicate and engage with the stakeholders, PIs, those next level end users, match funders, the participants of the consortium. All of that is a need for us to kind of extend our capacity. And then we really are hoping that in that extension, you're helping us demonstrate these deliverables and how they're influencing that value chain as well as informing policy. So really taking it to that next level of the outcomes. And then again, coming back to kind of what your role is as you're thinking about submitting a proposal, making sure your team's got some economic expertise on it. Because one of the huge desires is when we're asking for the exemplar cases, as you can read in the RFP, we really hope that for some of the more mature innovations that are within this funding portfolio, within this consortium, that we'll be able to have the evaluator do some modeling of economic realized gains. So if things have been adopted, or prospectively kind of project what that monetization, what those economic impacts are. So that's going to be really important in terms of the role of the evaluator. We've got a couple more things that we desire out of an evaluator as well. We hope that what you return to us really equips us to do something, to create some actionable tasks for us, both from the recommendations that can help inform ICASA 2.0, as was discussed, but also in terms of providing us with data visualizations in the final report, with reports and exemplars in those case studies that are really going to help us kind of communicate the value of this particular consortium and the work that was funded. And in that regard, one of the major things for the evaluator is we're going to ask for, as you saw, if you've read the request for proposal, is one of the deliverables being a standalone public-facing executive summary type document, a 2-pager to 5-pager, which is really going to be your groups, your firms, your teams kind of validation of the success of ICASA and helping us understand and communicate at large what ICASA has done. And that is going to be something that we're going to put public facing to really just have transparency with all of our stakeholders around what the ICASA consortium has done to date. Now, when we discuss kind of your role, it's also, I guess, imperative for us to kind of share with you what our role is. And so from a FAR perspective, what we're going to kind of provide is as much of the background information as we can. Our databases are a plethora of information, but sometimes there's gaps. And so we're going to work together to fill those gaps, but we'll be sharing project details from all the funded projects, including the proposals. We'll share with you what we have is in terms of annual performance reporting and final performance reporting. We've got high level budget information that we'll hand off. We've got PI contact information. We've got participant match funder information. So we're going to make, and we'll help make those introductions for any key informant interviews or for those surveys. And so those are one of the things that we'll help provide on the front end for you, as well as we're going to create kind of a space for us to collaborate. So we work in teams most generally, and an online workspace for us to streamline that data sharing, to communicate back and forth, to coordinate in real time. And so that's one of the things we'll be providing as well. And then lastly, we try to actively engage with those project deliverables. So as we set up milestones, when we're discussing kind of the evaluation framework, if you get the contract, we'll meet and then we'll review what you submit. We'll again collaborate and review the suggested measures or metrics. We'll kind of review in a timely manner the questions that you're proposing from data collection to help refine those, to make sure they're tailored to the consortium, and all draft reports and getting that back to you in that refined process in a timely manner. So like I mentioned, stemming from the consortium aims that were discussed, we have set up evaluation questions. The first two really connect to that process and implementation assessment. We really want to understand the extent to which ICASA's structure has been appropriate for meeting those aims. And that would be something about evaluating and assessing the work group design. As was mentioned, there have been 6 work groups historically that were set up. The type of research that was funded, the funding amount, even the way it was funded. As Dr. Bruno mentioned, there's both competitive funding within the consortium and direct funding within the consortium, helping the science team really understand those funding mechanisms and which ones have been most efficient and most effective. Proposal turnaround time, match requirements, all things that would kind of fit within assessing the structure of the consortium. And to that effect, also, to what extent did the project integrate a bunch of these stakeholders? This is really important from the way FAR runs consortia in general, is that the idea is they're very collaborative space. And to what Dr. Bruno mentioned and Dr. Martin LaValle mentioned, a lot of the participants are engaging in different ways, setting up the scientific scope and things along those lines. And so helping us understand that integration, how industry, how other stakeholders were involved in this process, involved in designing the work group aims, designing the proposals that got funded, and kind of being a part of that whole research design. As we move onward, outside of that, more tailored toward the outcomes and impacts assessment within the evaluation are really helping us go out and understand whether or not the funded research achieved the consortium aims. So that is really going to look like helping us understand the extent to which projects had developed this cross-disciplinary management practices and approaches. Did they deliver on that? Did funded research kind of deliver on new diagnostic tools or technologies? Did funded research deliver on helping to better understand the biological function of antibiotic alternatives? And then lastly, kind of a big one that's maybe harder to answer, but still just as important, is did the funded research benefit the public good? Were knowledge products getting distributed so that audiences could use them and do something with that information? And that's going to be really important for us to understand. Additionally, connecting kind of back to this idea of what the FAR consortium is about, to what extent had the consortium kind of created and sustained partnerships? That's going to be something for the evaluator to help us tease out the strength of those partnerships and kind of that relationship. And then there's 2 further evaluation questions. This 5th one is really the impact question. Of the research that was funded, have those knowledge products have those innovations matured enough to the extent that they are impacting, that they are improving animal welfare outcomes, that they are improving animal health, that they're improving antimicrobial stewardship outcomes, and helping us really track that from the research forward into the industry. And again, mainly in connection to beef and swine, but there could be ancillary benefits going across animal agriculture industries or even into human health. And that's going to be something that would be really neat to track as well. And then coming back to this kind of overarching economic side of things, that the monetized impacts is really comparing ICASA antimicrobial research and microbial stewardship research to other entities that are doing similar stuff and helping us understand how ICASA played a unique role or comparatively kind of advance things differently than other institutions, both from socio and economic standpoints. And that can be something we get into more detail as well. And I think exemplar cases kind of fit under this last evaluation question. Now, for what we're hoping to get in return, we have some of these deliverables listed in the request for proposal, but I'll go over some of them briefly here. One of the main ones, as I mentioned, is this kind of third-party communication that's going to be this external-facing document summarizing the findings of the evaluation, really taking your team, your firm's approach and understanding of answering the evaluation questions and sharing that with FAR being transparent about those findings. So that's going to be really important for us to have. We want a functional data spreadsheet. What that really means is, as we're setting up these measures, these metrics, as you understand some of the indicators you're going to be collecting that FAR has established, and we'll talk about those in a moment, that we've got evaluation questions tied to these measures, tied to these indicators. And there's a spreadsheet that we can pivot and use internally that you fill out, you compile through your key informant interviews, through your surveys. And that data will live with us so that over time we can continue to query it and ask questions of it and analyze it. We also hope that the evaluator throughout this process will come to a place where they have preliminary findings ready and develop a slide deck to present those to FAR stakeholders, to the people you see on this webinar, as well as others internal to FAR, to really understand, before we get to the drafting of reports, what some of the findings are. And this is crucial from this one, because as we talk about timeline, these preliminary findings are going to be really important for a meeting that the consortium will be having, and we want to make sure that these findings in that meeting align. We also hope to have two final reports that come to us. One is going to be, again, from that process implementation assessment. That one is going to have both the findings, but also recommendations for best practices, how ICASA 2.0 can evolve from ICASA 1.0. And then another final report that is a deliverable is going to be the outputs, outcomes, and impacts final report. That's going to be the one that is really showcasing, detailing to us the findings, the innovations, the knowledge products that came out of the research, and then again, how they are kind of being adopted, or how they matured, how they're impacting the industry. And lastly but just as important, are those exemplar cases that are really the cost benefit analysis, the monetization of some of the more mature innovations or knowledge products, as compared to a counterfactual. If ICASA did not fund this research, would these things advance that far? Would the value on the industry be the same? Now, we're going to go into some illustrative examples. This is something that a lot of evaluators in the past have asked of us, so I'm going to provide them. There are probably people on the call that have done this work for us. I didn't ask them whether or not they wanted to be cited, so I'm not going to name whose products these are, but these are really good exemplars of some of the things we've gotten from past evaluators that showcase the information that we're looking for. And so I've mentioned innovations, and we really want to see the capture of those innovations. And so we want you to be able to categorize those innovations for us and display them in ways that help us understand things. So helping us understand the number of innovations or knowledge products that came from the research that was funded, and then what types were they. Again, we're looking for management practices and approaches across disciplines. We're looking for technologies that can be applied, diagnostic tools. Those are some of the innovations that ICASA was hoping to develop. And so we need you to help capture those and display those for us. At the same time, again, how are they being used? What is the uptake of the knowledge of the research findings? And to be able to cite using databases to help us understand how the science is being cited in decisional memos, white papers, NGOs, IGOs, think tanks, how they're using the findings and citing the research that ICASA funded. And you can do that in multiple different ways, but really helping us understand the breadth and that reach of the scientific knowledge that's been funded, those findings, and how it's being utilized in kind of the policy space. What's equally important, we talked about the innovations, and not just tracking the number, the count of them, but the maturity of them. And so within FAR, we'll talk about this a little bit. We have developed one indicator that is the stages of research, development, and deployment, and helps us understand from projects how the innovation has matured towards potential commercialization, things along those lines that are adoption and uptake and utilization in the industry. And that's something we need the evaluator to be able to track for us and through KIIs, through surveys. And it's really important that the evaluator use the proposals to help us capture what was it, because we have to look historically, because we haven't collected this in the past. We are collecting it moving forward here at FAR, but we haven't collected in the past. So what at project proposal was the stage? Where at project completion, if the project that was funded through ICASA is done, is the stage of the innovation or knowledge product? And then if the project was completed 2-3 years ago, at the time of the evaluation, again, assessing, has that innovation, has that knowledge product matured further down this pipeline of research development deployment? So three spots and time points we want the evaluator to be go out and help us gather. We want you to validate that, because a lot of that's probably going to be asking the PI, but we want that to be validated. We trust the PIs, but you as an evaluator are expertise, and hopefully you're bringing some of that expertise to the table that understand these topics, that understand antimicrobial stewardship and the technologies or their practices that are involved in this research field, to help us validate the PI's perspectives on where this innovation or knowledge product lands. So that's going to be really important to be able to bring that kind of validation and averaging out, if you will, of kind of what stage it might land on. And then to be able to calculate that change in stage across time. So helping us understand from project start to finish, how many stages did the innovation move? That's going to be really important information for us to communicate, one, as an outcome, but then two, to help from a recommendation 2.0 understanding of what working groups were really trying to target the movement of things and how those knowledge products moved. So that change is going to be really important for us to capture, and you're going to help us do that. Exemplars, again, are going to be really involved in the cost benefit analysis of some of these knowledge products or innovations that are more mature. And here's an example of a really good display of calculating realized gains as well as prospective gains over a time horizon. And that's really what's desired through these exemplars, is to hone in on a single project per exemplar and really dive into the details, understand the scenarios. What is the adoption already? What is the likely adoption over time? And build out some conservative cases where it might be smaller adoption and some optimistic cases, to really model a couple scenarios for us of what the cost benefit is, or the benefit cost ratio would be. And for that, it's going to be really important that the scenarios are kind of validated and they're well vetted in terms of what your assumptions are, and that could be through key informant interviews, really understanding the landscape of the industry in the field. that you're also kind of validating the counterfactual scenario, what's the likelihood that the project did or did not get funded. Would it have gotten funded somewhere else? And it's kind of even keel, or is it that FAR really did kind of jumpstart, springboard this idea, this knowledge product, this innovation, and being able to capture and calculate using that kind of baseline counterfactual. And then realistic price points, really thinking about how these technologies within the field, within the industry, what are realistic kind of price points to be able to use in your model. And then lastly, we're hoping for the perspective side of things to be a 10 to 15-year time horizon. So really helping us look outward about, with these scenarios, kind of over 10 years, 15 years, what is that monetized value of the knowledge product or the innovation on these adoption or uptake scenarios. And now let's get into the proposal process. Again, a lot of these details, almost all of these details, are within the RFP. So make sure you read the request for proposal with pretty good scrutiny. But to help highlight some of the things that may not stand out and scream at you, we're going to provide some of that information right now. So in terms of details, there is no platform to submit through. This is not running through BBGM, which is FAR's grant-making software platform. This is getting emailed to me at cgambino@foundationfar.org. And in the subject line, write ICASA evaluation proposal. And I'll pull all that information down. And again, we work within a Teams environment, and I will be providing that into a folder for our reviewers. Please submit it as a single compiled PDF. That's really important. It helps me manage things easier. It helps with you as you submit graphics or some illustrative examples that in a Word document, it doesn't move all around the page when we open it up on our side. PDF helps kind of solidify the way it looks. And that often helps when it comes to proposals, so that we see what you wanted us to see. And then try to label it for us with org name or team name, or if you're proposing as a single person entity, your name, underscore ICASA eval proposal, underscore the date, both month, day, and year. So these are some details in terms of submitting to make things a lot easier on my end to manage and keep that efficient. So again, email is the method to submit the proposal. Now let's talk timeline. It's about a month out from now. Friday, September 9th, 2025 is the submission deadline. And if you'll note, we are currently having that in Pacific Daylight Time, so 5 p.m. that time, just to give folks on other coasts and folks internationally an opportunity to submit in a timely manner and not kind of hold everyone to 5 p.m. Eastern, where we are headquartered. So just note that timeline, and Friday, September 19th. We hope to have our internal review process completed by October 10th, 2025, which will allow us, tentatively, we've got some holds for the week of October 20th to bring in finalists to present. And if you've noticed in the RFP, you submit a proposal, we review it, and then of those that we'll want to speak further with, you'll have a 60-minute window to present. 20 minutes of that is really going to be helping us understand your approach some more in the design and some illustrative examples, as well as plenty of time for discussion. This is really a dialogue, not an interview. And the few that get to join that will be tentatively the week of the 20th. We might try to move that up a little further, but right now we've got it slated for the week of the 20th of October. All right, so key proposal sections, I'm gonna probably wrap up in the next 5 minutes and give us some time for that Q&A section, because I've seen some questions come through and Nikki's gonna facilitate that for us. So key proposal sections, background and experience. This is really important for you to, one, showcase that your team has the skills listed that are desired, right? Has some knowledge of evaluation, has knowledge of antimicrobial stewardship, has knowledge of the beef and swine sector, but also brings an economic expertise to the table. You saw how big of a portion the cost benefit analysis in those exemplars is to this evaluation. So it's important to bring that expertise to the table. And then to showcase that you've done something similar. It doesn't need to be specifically antimicrobial stewardship, but it could be animal agriculture related. It should certainly have kind of this exemplar component to it, or some economic analysis in your evaluation, but to really showcase to us that you've done something similar and help us see you in this role. The approach, we want to know how you're going to collect data. We don't have a preferred method, but let us know. Is it going to be only key informative interview? Is it going to be a mix of both? Is it going to be something else entirely? Is it going to be just surveys? Let us know. Help us understand how you're collecting the data. And what types of data your team's going to collect. Specifically, we'll talk about this in a moment. It's going to be really important for us to understand the data you're going to gather, and then how that connects to answering the evaluation questions. And there's a part in the RFP that specifically calls out the example of illustrative measures. And I'll talk about that in a bullet point in a moment. And then, does your team have the capacity to execute? Kind of help us understand that you're not all starting the school year and everyone's going to be teaching 30 classes, and there's not going to be a ton of time to be able to dedicate to this. Help us understand that your team has the capacity to take this on. And then from a budget perspective, how much will it cost? That's important for us to know. And then, how are funds being used? We don't need to see a line by line budget, but we do need to see a budget justification to understand where the money is going, how it's going to be used, how it's split up by phases, and what it's going to be dedicated to. And then some specific call outs and connected to that is a reminder that there's a maximum bid for this, and we put a range there to make it easier for people to kind of understand this price point, but there's a maximum bid, and this is for you to be able to note whether or not you can make this work happen in the time frame, do everything we need to do, and it still meet what your organization desires and needs to be able to fund your staff. And then, going back to that point about the data and the evaluation questions, we need to see clearly relevant measures and metrics connected to evaluation questions. Now, when you hear that, it's not, we need you to tell us exactly what things are going to happen. Again, we're going to collaborate on the back end if you get contracted, but we need to be able to see how you're thinking about the evaluation questions. What kind of measures would you collect? What kind of data would you collect that would potentially connect to answering those evaluation questions? That is really crucial. If that does not show up, if we can't see those measures, those illustrative measures of what you might be collecting to answer the evaluation questions, then it's really hard for us to think about how you're thinking about this project as a whole. So that's critical. And then lastly, making sure that you link, again, back to the first one, we've requested some of those evaluation deliverables of similar work so that we can go and see some of the products that you've created for the evaluations that you've conducted. Quickly here, some of the questions that we usually get, and I wanted to kind of hedge some of those answers, is around indirect costs. FARA, for evaluative purposes, does allow for indirect costs, but we want to make certain that you understand that it's factored into consideration. So while you can submit for them, we understand the need for them, we would hope that you'd present a cost-effective proposal, and that's one of the things we're going to use to gauge proposals, is the cost effectiveness of the work. We do not require a match currently for evaluation projects. And historically, and probably for this evaluation as well, we have not funded travel to engage stakeholders. So in your proposal, try to write the proposal as if it's going to be virtual KIIs, it's going to be virtual surveys, it's going to be virtual data collection, because we have historically not funded. And if you do propose that, again, going back to the cost-effective component, it may not be competitive with all the proposals that come in. So just keep that in mind. All right, and the last piece of information is where to find FARS indicators. So like I mentioned, we have 14 standard indicators that's going to be important for you to help us as a capacity extension gather for these projects. And they actually will lend to measuring and help answering some of these evaluation questions, but they are found on the grants page under annual and final reports. There are 14 of them, and what you want to find is the FAR indicator handbook. There's a link to that PDF. And then specifically, I was talking about FAR stages for research, development, deployment. That is indicator 14, and indicator 14 in the handbook really helps describe innovation tracking across those stages. So that's going to be really important to maybe understand as you propose how you're going to approach gathering and capturing and tracking that information for us. And with that, we're going to open the floor for Nikki to help facilitate the Q&A and let us clarify anything you need from us. Nikki?
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm going to actually go back a slide, if I can. And, oh, it's at the beginning. There was a question around the proposal submission name, and I just wanted to re-show that to everybody. So here are the submission details. So to reiterate what Chris said, email to Chris Gambino with the subject line of ICASA evaluation proposal. It should be a single compressed PDF file with the file name of your organization, ICASA evaluation proposal, and the date. Any questions there? No. All right, I'm going to stop my share and then get to some of these Q&A questions that we had. All right, the first one that I saw is, and Chris, I'll let you answer this, is for this evaluation, is an animal science / vet expertise required versus a strong monitor evaluation learning background and general biological science background?
That's a great question. We don't want to deter anyone from proposing really good approach to the work. And we certainly understand that evaluators have an evaluative science skill set to be able to uncover different trends, different things. But one of the things we've found in this food and agriculture research space that FAR works and lives in is it really helps having someone with that expertise at the table when it comes to designing the questions so that you can cut through any noise and get to a lot of the results faster versus asking 3, 4, 5 questions to better understand the area of the science before you get to gathering the data. And so if your team doesn't have that expertise, what we recommend is you propose and hopefully have the connection. So don't propose something you can't deliver on, a scientific advisory panel that would bring that expertise, that could help vet information, that could help you design questions and things along those lines.
Thank you so much, Chris. The second question, which again, you may have answered slightly, but is around the budget template and if there's a specific budget template for this RFP.
We do not, from the evaluator side of things, have a specific budget template we ask you to use, rather a high-level budget breakdown as well as the budget justification talking about how that money is going to be spent. So if you plan to fund travel, then we would want to know that. If you're planning, if it costs X number of dollars to do an exemplar case, we'd like to know that. So it's more of a high level budget to understand the buckets in which the money is going to and justifying those reasons. So right now there's no template for evaluations.
Great, thank you for clarifying. And then Chris, I think this is the last question or that I see as of right now that I think you can answer. Would you be able to share how you expect the awardee to submit the financial documents too far throughout the duration of the project. So explain a little bit about our grants management portal, and then again, what access to documentations they have.
Can you point me to that question? Is this about how they're submitting finance to us to pay the contractor? Or okay, is that okay? In
Oh,
terms,
sorry to misunderstand that. Yeah.
so the way we operate right now, and it may shift at any moment, we operate through a platform called Bill. Essentially, we get you as a contractor signed up. I should note we will fund international evaluators, but you have to have a U.S. bank. So Bill.com was going to require you to have a US bank. Our finance team will get you set up, and then your invoices will get submitted through there and routed to myself and others as the appropriate people to approve those. And then as those invoices get approved, those payments will get executed. We typically aim to have around 5 to 6 deliverable milestones that match the payment schedule. So expect the cost to get broken down into 5 to 6 payments.
Thanks, Chris. Jasmine, jumping over to you, could you please share the details on the international versus domestic nature of ICASA and the expected evaluation?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. As you can see from the partners outlined in ICASA, the focus is on the benefits to US beef and the swine sector. But I think it is valid to consider that when we look at the vision overall and the complexities of those industries, there may be consideration of maybe potential spillover benefits internationally, for instance, and those would be something that I'd be interested in considering. So again, ICASA is focused on improvements in US beef and swine, with the understanding that we're excited to see potential international spillover benefits. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you. Miriam, I actually thought you would be best to answer this will the evaluation include both completed and ongoing projects, ICASA projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are hoping to have the majority of the projects completed, and then we are also going to have some uncompleted projects that will be ongoing. And so we understand that we have to have realistic expectations of you if projects are ongoing or are recently completed. And so when we think about those exemplar cases, for example, those will be completed projects that we're a little bit further out from. And so we will try to be strategic with how we evaluate projects based on if they're fully completed or not and how far out they are. So we will work with you on that to make sure that what we do makes the most sense, understanding that projects that have been completed a few years ago are going to be much easier to evaluate, and we understand that. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's perfect. The only thing would be that the exemplars are going to be a collaborative process. So we would expect the evaluator to help work with us to set criteria to decide on which the exemplar cases would be. And it is most likely going to be those that are more mature, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the case. But often in terms of the scoring criteria, that ends up being the case.
Great. Thank you both. This is more of an eligibility question. So Chris, I think this might be most suited to you, but can both domestic and international organizations apply for this RFP?
Yes, well, organizations can apply, but again, we'll need to have a US bank account. And so if that is not something that they currently have set up, then FAR does not have a way to fund and pay that contract.
Great. And then can you also speak on the timeline and what we hope the selected awardee has for the timeline specifics?
Yeah, that we have an estimated projected timeline in the RFP. Again, all of this stuff can change depending on when we execute the contract. There is, again, the desire around that March preliminary findings time point. That's one that's less flexible, is that we'd really like the evaluator to be able to deliver, to have as much of the data compiled and deliver some preliminary findings to our team, but also then present directly to the consortium participants at this March 2026 meeting. So that one's a little less flexible, but then when it comes to kind of final deliverables, FAR in general tries to finish up and publish its annual report April and May of every year. And so if there is a potential to get some of the exemplar information in by April 2026, that'd be ideal. So we could plug that into our annual report. But outside of that, there is flexibility with some of the timeline.
Great. Thanks for clarifying. Jasmine or Miriam, either one of you can answer this question, but it goes back to a little bit of the history of ICASA and the beef stewardship and swine stewardship that we selected for this specific consortium. Can you address why we focused on these two animal groups?
I can jump in quickly. Yeah, and as Nikki alluded to, some of this decision was very much also driven by the sectors that had the most appetite and ability to engage on this topic. So not only did they see antimicrobial stewardship as an economic and animal health need, and then we were able to get those collaborations and partnerships together. And again, we see those as being both significant industries where antimicrobial stewardship and judicious use is needed and relevant. That being said, we know that there are other industries where that's also valid, whether or not that's poultry or dairy. So we would be open to evaluators considering this question of, have we created this collaboration around the most critical industry needs? And if not, are there any suggestions with kind of next steps for ICASA 2.0? Miriam, anything else to add there?
No, great job, Jasmine, covering that.
That's currently what I'm seeing in the question and answer.
I think I see one more, Nikki, and maybe I messed up because I was answering it. But Jennifer had a question that I can take.
Oh, please. Yeah. Sorry, Chris.
Jennifer asking whether or not currently FAR grantees are required to report on FAR indicators, which is a great question. The answer is yes-ish, meaning we have rolled out our new reporting system that includes our standard indicators, and we're doing a year-long pilot of it as we continue to refine that and the way that we're collecting that information. So projects from January 2025 reporting deadlines into the future will be collecting and reporting on those 14 indicators, but the majority of the projects that were funded through ICASA in terms of historical data collected in annual and final reports will not have those indicators as a part of their reports. So that's a key distinction, and that's one of the extensions in terms of capacity that we're really hoping that the evaluator brings to the table. And those indicators really match to some of the evaluation questions. For example, the first 2 to 4 indicators are about publications, both scientific as well as more popular press. And I think that lends well to that question we talked about, or that aim that's around the public good and distribution and dissemination of information, right? So it's not as if we're going to ask you to collect something that doesn't come back to the evaluation. A lot of the 14 indicators really do plug into the evaluation question.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for catching that. I see that we're at time. Without further ado, I'm going to share quickly just the last slide with you, and thank you all for your participation, your questions, and for joining us today to learn more about the ICASA evaluation. Again, if you need anything, you can always email the animal science production systems team, or more directly, Dr. Chris Gambino over here. We also have a QR code that links directly to the ICASA evaluation webpage that exists. So thank you so much. A recording will be sent to all attendees today. And without further ado, have a good afternoon or evening.